Cool. So I'll dive in. My name is Ed Melick. I am the Director of Business Development and Responsible AI for the Center for Applied AI. And I'm going to be talking today about responsible AI frameworks and AI risk management frameworks. And maybe a couple of you heard early on, Tom and I joking around a little bit at the beginning that this is a fragmented topic. So it was a little bit of a challenge to put this deck together versus some of the other ones that I presented on ethics and deep fakes and disinformation in the past. But we'll dive in and hope for the best. So I want to kick off basically just talking about the promise and peril. I think there's different terms, different ways we can describe this, but the promise of AI is the good things that AI can do. And the peril is the bad things it should not do. We need to prevent it from doing. And examples of each of these abound. I think my favorite good examples are in the healthcare space. We're hearing about applications where we're training models with mammogram images, thousands of images of CAT scans of lungs, and we have these highly predictive models of lung cancer, breast cancer. I think the most famous thing is recently three of the people that work with DeepMinds won the 2024 Nobel Prize for Chemistry just in the last month or so for their AlphaFold research, which is dramatically accelerating research for drug development. On the peril side, there's these bad things. I mentioned disinformation. We've got deep fake porns coming out. We've got financial fraud. There's a lot of bad things that can be used, AI can be used for, and unintentional things that can happen. And this is where we'll be discussing, risks and risk management. And so really this leads into the whole topic of the alignment problem. How do we make sure these models do what we want them to do and don't do what we don't want them to do? And I also have started thinking a lot recently about what I call the framework problem. Basically, we've got an explosion in the number of AI systems that are out there, the types, the capabilities, and just the users and the uses of them. And the gap between the power of these systems and the speed with which we're developing them is big between that and the governance of them. And that gap is really wide and it's growing by the day. You can see large companies, Google and Meta, DeepMind and AI, OpenAI. There's a handful of companies that are developing this technology, and it's a race for the riches. And the scaffolding and the frameworks and the things that are being put in place to make sure they behave trustworthy and responsibly is being left in the dust, and that gap is growing. And this poses significant risks. And in parallel with this, there's the sudden appearance of a host of governance frameworks. It's funny, I call the NIST framework the granddaddy of these risk management frameworks. It's only been around since January 2023, which is less than 2 years. And yet a whole host of models have come out. I've heard that there's anywhere from 40 to 100 of these, but it's really difficult to find publicly available databases that track these and that are available to look at. And we're going to talk about that as well. So all of this has led to confusion and hesitance. Companies, they don't know how to get going. There's this patchwork of frameworks out there, and they're really not sure how to start and to reliably get going. I just one example here of sort of the confusion. I mean, if you Stanford University has created this human-centered artificial intelligence, used to be called the Institute. They just call it Stanford HCI now, or excuse me, HAI. And they just talk about how, there's really standards and evaluations for large language models that make sure they're behaving responsibly are, in their words, seriously lacking. And that's a big concern. And this is just one example of many of the lag between the development of these technologies and where we are in terms of governing them. So just a quick word on word salad. A lot of terms, like in any industry, any sector, you're going to hear a lot of terms. Responsible AI and trustworthy AI, you're going to hear them a lot. Some people favor one over the other. They're typically used interchangeably. There's not complete overlap, but they're typically used interchangeably. I prefer responsible AI. Things like ethical, safe, secure, fair AI. I've searched and searched for Venn diagrams that kind of visually represent this, and there's nothing to be found. And then there's some, even kind of more strange terms that have come up, like contestable AI or constitutional AI from Anthropic. And I even have a friend who wrote a PhD dissertation on righteous AI. And so there's all these terms, how do you get your arms around the word salad? So I'm trying to create some basic visuals in here to help us to do that. One thing I wanted to mention right up front is this relationship between trustworthiness and risk. They do affect one another. So when we hear people talking about trustworthy, responsible AI and risk management, I drew this little super simple diagram to show that AI governance is sort of this umbrella over everything. Some people feel that these two things are both subsets of AI governance. Others feel like AI risk management is under responsible AI. I just felt like it was important to kind of show this up front because you can look at it in either way. And so it can be confusing when you look at these things. So let's talk about AI governance first. This is really the overall management and oversight of AI systems. It's all the frameworks, policies, practices, and policies you would put in place to do that. And I again searched through the web on these chatbots to try to find some visual representations. I love when you can find something that captures in a visual snapshot something like this. And what I found is just a real, variation in these visuals and in what people define as frameworks. This is one example. When I initially looked at it, I thought, wow, it looks like it has all of the NIST pillars of responsible AI, but it doesn't. When you really dig down, it's got a few of them, but some other, sort of original creative things. This is from a research group called Infotech. This is another group that created something, Tech Target. And I like this representation because it shows how business issues, business priorities, and goals feed into AI governance. But this is a very simple 5-component governance snapshot and how that feeds into what the AI and tech teams in an organization do. Here's another map from the effective altruism website. This is a mess. It's very difficult to interpret this. There's an article that comes along with this, and it describes these blocks nicely. But my point is, there's a lot of different frameworks out there. And when you look at these, it becomes very confusing. What do you do? What steps do you take to actually govern AI? So the last visual I have in here is, and I'd like you guys, I challenge you, when we post this deck on the Discord server, check out this link because there's a blogger named Adam Jones. And what he did is he wrote an article and said, yeah, it's a confusing mess. There's a patchwork out there. So here's an article on some basic practices, and he divided them up based on the life cycle for an AI system. Are you in pre-training, post-training, post-development work? Are you looking at some practices that cut across all three of those? And here's very specific things you can do to get going. And I think really that's one of the things we're going to talk about at the end is just get going, pick the low-hanging fruit, do simple things, and just get started. So if you're, for example, NVIDIA, you're going to want to consider on-chip governance mechanisms. You're also going to want to look at policies that may restrict the sale of your chips to unfriendly nation states. And so this is a great article that gives you some ideas. It's not exhaustive, I'm sure, but some practices that you could use to begin governing, doing AI governance. So next topic is responsible AI. This is a formal governance framework. It's a subset of AI governance. And it's really about, trying to make sure that the AI systems are fair, transparent, accountable. You're aligning with societal norms and you're respecting human rights. And once again, I got online and I was poking around and doing research on what is out there. I kind of like this particular framework. It was written in a technical paper. It's written by mostly Europeans. There was one Asian and one US representative, but it shows sort of foundationally that you want to consider ethics across all the pillars. You want to consider lawfulness. What are the laws and regulations that you have to honor? And what is the performance, the robustness and performance reliability of the systems? These are foundational things that cut across all of these pillars. And then above that, is the system transparent? Is it accountable? Is it fair and unbiased? And all of that, if you're taking into account these things, they lead to a trustworthy system. If you jump ahead and you look at the NIST model, it's kind of similar, but it's not. Some things they break out safeness and validity and performance, whereas they're bundled together in this model. Same thing with accountability and transparency. They break them out on this model. And you start to see some things pop up that are not in these other models. And this continues. If you look at, and I picked this particular example, this is the Responsible AI Institute. And the reason I'm showing them is, again, it's just another perspective, but they also have a certification that they're giving companies. If people come to them share their systems. They will review those systems and give a certification. And that's important because this is eventually going to happen. We have all sorts of certifications that are respected in the cybersecurity space and the cloud space. That's going to happen as well regarding AI, but we're not quite there. But the Responsible AI Institute has developed something. But again, you can see that same sort of terms are coming up, but they're grouped differently. And there's some things that are unique to this model that aren't in any of the other models. And then just one more example is the DoD. They have something
Hey
here.
Ed, do you mind me interrupting real quick on the AI Institute? Is that a consortium of players or?
I'm not really sure. I think it's a nonprofit. I haven't looked back at them recently. Um, why don't you do me a favor? Look into that a little bit while I'm talking and pop in and share that with us. Because the thing I was focused on when I stumbled across it, again, a lot of data I was drinking in on this deck is just kind of saw that they were certifying things and they were providing that service, but I'm not really sure if they're a nonprofit or not. So if you would look at that while we're doing that, and then you can cut in, when you find out. This is the DoD model. They call this the responsible AI journey to trust. So they're using both responsible and trustworthiness in their description. They're looking at warfighters. They're working at developing our defense infrastructure. So they start off with things like the law of armed conflict, Geneva Convention, things like that, rules that people have signed on to. Many nations, I think 190 countries have signed on to that. And they say we've got to honor those in the AI systems. Then they look at their ethical principles, which they've published, and these really parallel the pillars that NIST and other organizations talk about. And that feeds into, they have published a responsible AI strategy and implementation pathway document. So they're looking at things like the AI workforce and warfighter trust. How do you develop that with these systems? You look at these things sequentially, and you come up with a trustworthy AI system. Again, we have 4 different things of many that are out there, and it can get confusing. Which one do I pick? How do I move forward to try to implement a responsible AI program? Risk management, next thing we'll talk about. This is focused much more narrowly on mitigating risks. So that's why some people do consider it a subset of the responsible AI. There's a lot of harms that these systems can do to people, to organizations, to ecosystems. I think a lot about the current elections. I think there are elections in 50 to 60 countries this year. 2.4 billion people are expected to vote. We've got an election here in a week and a half, and it's just highly contentious. A lot of misinformation, disinformation. So there's a chance of harm being done not only to people but the democratic institutions in the process. If you look at organizations, reputational damage, financial damage to organizations can be done with these technologies. And when I think of ecosystems, I think a lot about cybersecurity, power grids. Power grids, we hear a lot about the Chinese are already on our networks in the systems, and they've been there for many years. And they may perhaps, if they invade Taiwan, I've heard people theorize that they may knock out our power grid or something to distract us from the initial efforts of defending Taiwan. So there's all these sort of harms that could be done with AI systems. This is a better diagram than the original one I showed you. I made that first one overly simplified for a reason. But here I show as subsets of AI governance, both responsible AI and risk management. And I show how, responsible AI and risk management feed and affect each other. If you reduce risk, that's going to make the system more responsible. If you make the system more responsible, you're by definition reducing risk. So I wanted to show that. I've got the pillars from the NIST model below responsible AI and some fairly common risk management factors, components below the risk management. And I put a few other subsets of governance in there as well, because there's other things that are related. So now a survey of frameworks. There's a lot of stuff out there. And I intentionally made this chart really busy. So if you look in the left column, it's mostly DoD related, government agency, executive branch type things. They even threw the EU AI Act in there. The ones that I have highlighted are really relevant. I think they're worth clicking through and looking at. In the middle column, I've got mainly private sector stuff. I've got the big Co's, the Microsofts, the Googles. Again, there's many other models from McKinsey and other companies, Deloitte. And then I have a few frameworks from the frontier AI companies like Google, DeepMind, Anthropic, and OpenAI. And then on the right is just a real crazy mix of things. There's some standards organizations like ISO. NATO has a strategy for AI. The Center for Security and Emerging Technologies from Georgetown, they have a really nice AI harm framework and something they call the AI triad. But I just kind of threw all this in there and said, this is only a portion of what's going on out there. So you can see how looking at this and wondering, well, what would I do? What should I do? And it's interesting as part of preparing for this presentation, I stumbled across an article just in the last day from the Partnership on AI, and they actually took the time to compare 8 different frameworks. And, their conclusion was this may lead to an incoherent patchwork of frameworks. Me looking at the data was it has led to this incoherent patchwork. It's already here. And this is going to cause problems because companies are going to hesitate. And then when they try to implement these systems, they're not going to have a good structure for doing it, for guiding what they do. So what I want to do is look at 2 specific things. I want to look at, again, what I call the granddaddy of the risk management frameworks. It's really sort of emerging as the de facto standard, and it may become that. It may even become maybe the US government will make this a regulatory requirement that people follow this. But right now, it is what people look to first when they're trying to define risk management frameworks, and that's from NIST. So this is just a quote from the woman who runs the Assessing Risks and Impacts program at NIST. And she basically says it's a voluntary resource. It's a lot of, it's a lot of resources for the companies can use, and they can pick and choose pieces and portions of this, but it helps them to manage the risk in these systems and promote trustworthy and responsible AI. And I thought it was interesting. She used all 3 of those words: risk, trustworthiness, and responsibility. I could bore you all with all sorts of diagrams because NIST, the documentation has several of them. I tried to boil it down to one visual. There are 4 fundamental components to this framework, 4 core components: governing, mapping, measuring, and managing. And each one of them, they drill down in further and further categories and subcategories. But the core thing here is they want companies to cultivate, implement, and create a culture of risk management. This is a difficult thing to do because this is the sort of thing where the risk guys come into a meeting and the responsible AI people come into a meeting and people are like, oh God, it's these guys again. They're going to have 500 requirements we're supposed to abide by. And you know what? I've got a deadline. I've got a proposal to do. I've got a system to launch. And it's seen as a distraction. And typically these are the people that get laid off at first. And if you look at the layoff history of OpenAI, of Meta, places like Twitter, that's what happened. These people that were looking at responsibility and trustworthiness were the first people to go when there were layoffs. So how do you implement a culture like that? And one thing I didn't put in here was, and we're going to talk about at the end, is you got to think about how responsible AI and risk management affect the bottom line of a company. Because when people understand that, they're going to want to welcome you in and integrate you in the processes. So this is really the core of governing. The map process, measuring, all these are pretty much what they say they are. In map, you're identifying where and how the system is used, and you create an AI system map. It shows all the components, interfaces, data flows, and boundaries. And getting that visual representation, you can more readily identify risks, looking at that map and considering the context of operation. Measuring it, you're going to continuously monitor, measure, collect data, analyze the performance. That process in and of itself will identify new risks, but this is a constant iteration process of collecting and reviewing that data. And then in managing, how do you respond to that, recover from, communicate about these instances, and how do you allocate your resources to this entire process? So I tried to break this sprawling document down into just this sort of snapshot and share this with you all. As I mentioned, if you look at govern, there's categories. There's probably 5 or so categories. And then each of those has subcategories. So here you're looking at the broad policies, processes, procedures of govern 1. You get down into govern 1.1, there's legal and regulatory requirements very specifically. And then that feeds into something called the RMF playbook. And the playbook has, I think, 213 well, that's actually for the profile for Gen AI. We'll get that in a second. It has hundreds of suggested actions and practices that you can take, and it has documency and transparency suggestions that you can do. So wanted to give kind of a quick snapshot of the sort of the hierarchy of that. Um, Important to talk about profiles now. NIST realized that this risk management framework that they published is a very broad document that can apply to any particular system. But they realized that these frameworks are going to have to be customized based on the application. So they created this term profile, and it's relevant to a specific setting or application or technology. And they created right away a working group to focus on generative AI profile. And they recently published that just in July of 2024. So it's defining additional risks in additional to the general RMF that are specific to, they're novel or novel to or exacerbated by generative AI. They call that GAI. There's 12 risks that they identified. They've got things like, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear information that can be used and exploited by nefarious sources. They've got dangerous, violent, hateful content. And then they have the general stuff like information integrity. So again, over 200 suggested actions to manage these risks. And this is in addition to the risk management framework. And you can see that this is kind of spinning out of control. There are many hundreds of suggested actions. How do you get your arms around what to do and start moving? The next thing here is I want to talk about a blended framework. It's obvious. You're going to have to take several frameworks elements from them and put them together for whatever you happen to be working on. And I think the most impressive one that I've seen so far, and I don't have a ton of information on it, is from the Army. They have something called the Army AI Layered Defense Network. And the way we found out about this is the Army sent out a request for information soliciting feedback on what they're doing. And they basically said, hey, we've got this defense framework we've developed. We want it to be a living and evolving document. We want to be constantly improving it. And we want feedback from private industry on how to go about doing this. And they basically listed in the solicitation the NIST RMF. They talked about Microsoft and Google, IEEE. You see a list of specific items they said that their current LDF contains. And they mentioned others. I don't know whether there's 2 or 10 others. And then they were saying, hey, are we missing something? Do we have to be doing something differently? Is there something we should modify? And so they actually put 2 things in the document. One was this diagram, which sort of shows risk tolerance plotted against, level of mitigation control. And I tell you, I don't like the coloration on this. I feel like models that are more risk tolerant and need low control mitigation should be green, and the red ones should be the ones that are more averse. And I think they use the wrong word there. I think it should be risk averse models. But the point is, you get the message. They're looking at things and saying, hey, here's technologies that are resilient, they're low complexity, high transparency. You can put continuous monitor systems in place there and let them run and you'll be okay. Then at the bottom of that pyramid, these are models that are high value and they simply cannot be compromised. And so, it has high adversarial value, and you have to put much more complex control mitigation mechanisms in place to protect those. So if you scroll down, they also included this sprawling chart where they had all these mitigations across the top and the columns. And they had a number of risks listed on the left, and they broke them out into components. So what I did is I created a diagram here that shows the 5 basic components: data, infrastructure, models, human factors. And I picked out one example of a risk, and I showed you how many mitigation factors they feel relate to that. So if you look at data poisoning, there's 18 mitigations in the layer 1. And they basically said, hey, there's 17 of those 18 things you could use to mitigate this. And so I just wanted to kind of give a snapshot of, this is already turning into quite a document: 67 mitigations across 48 risks, and it's going to grow. And we're going to talk about how it has grown in a second in a more general database. But that's an example. Here's a little sort of zoom in on the table. Here's on the left is data and some of the things like Trojan attacks, data poisoning, whatever. And then at the top, here's some basic mitigations that you could do: sanitize training data, implement firewalling, et cetera. So just a quick snapshot of the Army LDF. So one of the things I wanted to bring up during this presentation is something that we've sort of been talking about internally called the framework profiler. And I mentioned I was looking for resources. I actually got on multiple chatbots and said, hey, are there any databases of these frameworks out there? And one of the chatbots, I requested this. I said, give me links to those databases. And it gave me 8 links, and every one of them was broken. Not one of them led to a database of frameworks. And that was incredibly telling. And so we've been talking internally, and we've already been doing this work, building a living frameworks database. And what we'd like to do is take it even a step further and make it something that's queryable. So in other words, you can load all those frameworks into an AI platform and develop a web-based interface and ping that system. You can go in and type in, hey, this is our company. This is what we're doing. We're a chip manufacturer. We're a SaaS-based AI platform, whatever. This is our relevant stage of development deployment. Here's our focus. We're focused on data or algorithms or compute power or whatever, or a particular application. Here's the size of our company, the reach of our systems, et cetera. And the system would output a recommended framework that's ideal for that. It's an ideal blend of those many frameworks for that particular application. So we're calling this, again, a framework profiler. And the database would also function as sort of a definitive, up-to-date source for information on all publicly available RAI frameworks. So this is something we've contemplated. We've actually submitted a proposal for some grant money, and we're actually looking for people who may want to partner with us on developing this work. We have an AI lab with engineers working in there who will be working on this, and we've already started the work on gathering all that data in one source, framing it, putting it into a taxonomy is the term people use. And I just wanted to share this with folks and get you all percolating on this and get any feedback that you may have. So a quick word about taxonomies. I both love and hate that word. It's basically just, again, a way of defining and framing and structuring data that you're trying to share. And I wanted to talk about 3 specific taxonomies of risk. There are more out there. There's probably 6 or 7 of them. But one of them that came out recently was from MIT, and it's absolutely a gorgeous collection of information. It's on the web. It's free. They have identified 777 AI risks. And they use the word taxonomy and document, like a technical paper, interchangeably here. So what they did is they reviewed 43, probably what they considered seminal or really solid papers on risk, and identified out of those papers 777 risks. And they bunched them into 7 domains. And I'm going to show you some information in a second. There's also a really good paper written by someone at the University of Stuttgart that also did a document review or review of the literature. And they identified 375 issues, and they grouped them into 19 areas. And if you go to the link here, they have a really cool mind map of these risks. And then finally, another paper that came out really recently is a taxonomy of misuse tactics from Google DeepMind. And it was focused on generative AI. And it was not only a literature review, but they were looking at misuse and abuse media reports. So they were sort of boasting in the paper that this is a more realistic view of what's really happening. These first 2 databases may have been reporting on things that were in technical papers and scholarly papers, but the DeepMind database is, hey, this is actual stuff that's happened and is being reported in the news. So if you look at the risk snapshot from MIT, they created, again, there's that word taxonomy. They created 2 taxonomies. One is causal. What are the different perspectives on the causes of risk? What entity caused it? Was it human or AI-driven or unknown? What was the intent of that risk? Was it intentional or unintentional, or is it unclear? When is that risk relevant? Is it relevant in the pre-deployment stage and post-deployment, or is that unclear as well? And then they also created a taxonomy related to these domains that they defined. Discrimination and toxicity, privacy, security, you can read these. Here's an example of the data they have. If you click through on the website, they've got a beautiful paper that describes what they've done. You can download a workbook which has multiple worksheets in it. One of them is this high level, and I'm only showing the majority of, but a portion of it. And it shows the different domains and then some of the subdomains. And it tells you, hey, for unfair discrimination and misrepresentation, 8% of the risks are related to that. And it appeared in 63% of the documents that we reviewed. So it's really a nice snapshot. It's most certainly the most thorough snapshot of risks that's out there on the market. Here's a snapshot of the Stuttgart data. These are these 19 different buckets that they created, they defined for risk. And then they show the greater length was the more occurrences. There were more occurrences of fairness and bias risks. There were the safety risks were secondary. The third most occurring were harmful content and toxicity and so forth. And then finally, I titled this actual in quotes because we're really not totally sure because every way of measuring something has its pros and its cons. But this is a diagram in the Google DeepMind article. And so, this issue of information integrity, impersonation, sock puppeting, appropriated likenesses, and then this sort of sexual content that's being generated, the NC2 stuff, those 4 out of the top 6 all relate to data integrity, and that's like 57, 58% of the misuses. And so they're saying, hey, this is what's actually happening here. But I want to make sure I add here, you only have to have one good deep fake that you publish in an election cycle, and you can upset an entire election. And that happened in, I'm forgetting the name of the country recently, where someone posted a deep fake which inappropriately showed someone scheming to sway the election when they really hadn't done that. And people believe that affected the outcome of the election. It's one of the Slavic nations. I can't remember it right now. But this is some data of, hey, it's not only a literature review, but we're looking at media reports and what they're saying about this. So that's just, I wanted to make sure I mentioned specifically risk summaries, repositories, taxonomies. So just to kind of wrap things up, I just wanted to mention some things. I've listened to a lot of people, read articles, watched videos about what various experts are recommending that people do to try to just get unstuck. And I think a lot of us know when we're working on a paper or a project or whatever, sometimes it's just taking the low-hanging fruit and starting to work on it, and then the dam breaks and you're really on a roll. So resources, get started with resources, especially human capital. If you're launching some sort of responsible AI or trustworthy AI initiative, get people in place, and the most important person, who's leading that effort. Get that person, hopefully they're experienced, which is tough to find these days in this area, but make them empowered and accountable. Get that person in place and cut them loose and get them going. The other thing is mapping these initiatives to the bottom line, the business bottom line. If you don't do that, it's going to be really hard for people and the programmers, the AI experts, other people in the company to be welcoming to you and the group. They're going to see you more as a nuisance than as someone that's contributing to the success of the organization or the business. The other thing is just start with the NIST framework, but focus on low-hanging fruit. Don't get overwhelmed and blown away by all these suggestions and recommendations, because it's a mountain, it truly is. So look at something simple like, all right, what laws apply? We got to obey the law. So let's look at that first. What laws apply to us in our situation? State laws, national laws, laws relevant to our industry, and get that straight. Get them down on a piece of paper and start assessing whether you're doing those right. And then just look at, have we done an inventory of our AI systems? Have we done just a simple risk assessment? Have we done any kind of testing? Basic things. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just start with the simple stuff, and then you can move on. It'll just become more complex naturally as you move on. And start just putting basic procedures in place first, and then they'll get more and more complex as you move along, but just focus on the basic stuff first. So that's sort of just a little list of recommendations I wanted to put together for folks to just help them maybe get unstuck if you are stuck. And then finally, I just figured I'd slap together a handful of questions, for the group we could discuss now, or we can, just to get you thinking. I'd love to know if there's anybody on this call who is currently working with a responsible AI or risk management framework, in particular, any type of blended framework. And if you have, what have you learned? What are your experiences? What stage are you in that process? That would be really helpful to get that insight. Do you think that the NIST, if you're familiar with the NIST framework, do you think that'll become law or de facto standard? Are you hearing anything? Do you work in government agency circles or something? Are you seeing any trends with that? And what about the profiler? Hearing about this notion of creating a framework profiler, do you think that's a good idea? Do you think it's overkill? Do you think it's whatever? What is the reaction to that? So I wanted to kind of list a bunch of questions like this and just throw them out to the group. I think I finished up in about 24, 25 minutes here. giving the introductions and just, kind of open it up to comments with people and have a discussion.
And Ed, I guess I'm sure you'd be open to direct emails as well for
Oh
those.
yeah,
We'll
yeah,
wait till after this. Maybe you can throw that in the chat.
yeah. Here's the way to get a hold of me is my email. I can put it in the chat as well. This is my email address.
And I just want to, thank you for the summary there. I was recently in Rome, Italy, and I thought I was having trouble getting my head wrapped around 600 years of ancient Rome history. And at the beginning here, I was like, wow, this is pretty hard to get your head wrapped around 6 months of AI responsible risk management frameworks.
Yeah, it's growing fast, all of this stuff, and we need to somehow tame the beast.
It'd be good if NIST ends up, having the authority to be the standard around that for, non-DoD government institutions.
I think they will because they've really done a thorough, thoughtful, measured job at this. And, again, right away they created that working group to focus on Gen AI. And then they created sort of the National Safety Institute, AI Safety Institute, which was sort of an outgrowth of that. And so they're working on this and watching what the Army's doing. Now, of course, the Army is the Army. They've got bazillions of dollars. So they can put a whole bunch of people on a project and they can work with the vendors. The vendors are happy to beat a path to the Army in exchange for money and do all this stuff. So I'm glad they're sharing a lot of this with people. I hope they share more so that we can learn from their experiences. Maybe they're doing some kind of profiler work, or maybe their profiler is 100 soldiers looking at all this stuff and sitting at a grease board and figuring it all out. Who knows? But we figured as we talked about this at C4AI, let's use AI to grind through these frameworks. Let's load them all up and let AI do that hard work. And maybe it's not perfect what it spits out, but if it gets to 70 or 85% there, and then it's human in the loop, we get involved and we look at the results and see what happens. And it's, again, another way of getting unstuck and get moving forward.
Sounds like it has AI lab written all over it, Ed. Thank
Yes, it does. Yes.
you. So any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat yet, or any comments by internal C4AI folks or external folks.
And it's a dry topic, that's for sure. It's not like,
I just want to say, Ed, thank you for digesting all of this so the rest of us don't have to.
yeah.
And reading all of that. So
it's been
bless
painful.
you.
I will say that. I was wandering around here, and my daughter is currently living with me, and I was like, man, I'm not feeling good about this deck compared to the ethics deck and the other ones and all. But it sort of finally kind of came together in the last day or two. But this is an ongoing process. We're all learning together, and we're going to get better and better at this. But I think the important thing is we're cross-pollinating, we're sharing, we're putting this information together. We're sharing it with folks to try to help each other. Hopefully they can give us feedback in return. And that's the way we're going to move forward with this, not hoard all this and keep it to ourselves, but just, work together and try to share and help each other. So
it does look like there's a question in the chat, Ed.
yeah, I don't want to, maybe I should stop sharing the screen so I can see the questions as well.
Yeah, I just want to say that, that there is a lot of focus on this area from the federal government space and a lot of other state governments. They are definitely focusing a lot on this with several agencies trying to do the right thing. So.
Okay, good. All right. Since we're at 12:45, I want to thank everyone for spending time with us today. Again, as usual, we are excited about not only Ed's talk here, but upcoming talks next week. I just posted it in the chat a link to next week's Lunch and Learn will be around quantum computing. So maybe a slight divergence from AI, but at some point in time, these things will definitely merge together, AI and quantum computing. But next week, there's an exciting talk around quantum computing. I'm not going to miss that, Tushar. I can tell you that.
I tell you, quantum is exciting. And you combine quantum with AI and cyber, man, the possibilities are endless. It's going to be amazing.
So again, thanks to everyone, and Ed put his contact information. Feel free to reach out to any of us here at C4AI, or specifically our risk management framework guru, Ed Melick. We're happy to help. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah, I'll just mention real quick, Chris, I see your comment here. We'll get you the deck. We're going to be posting it on our Discord, correct, Tom, sometime
Yes,
soon?
absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, that'll be available for folks to look at. So,
Yeah, please join Discord. Thanks.
all right, all, thank you.
Thanks, Ed.